A new move by the Trump administration is drawing lots of questions this morning. The Justice Department says it plans to create a roughly $1.7 billion fund for people who claim they were unfairly targeted by the government after President Trump dropped a lawsuit tied to his leaked tax returns. 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor joining us more to talk about this. So we should start, Whitney, with what exactly was this lawsuit all about, and why did the president voluntarily drop it?
Right. So this case stemmed from the 2022 release of President Trump's tax returns, and it was released improperly. And so he sued, and then the New York Times ran a story about it, and it showed that he only paid $750 in federal taxes in 2016 and 2017.
Less than you and I.
Yes, significantly less.
Yes.
And so he sued the IRS and the Treasury Department. And he sued for $10 billion, saying that he suffered financial harm, which I don't know what that would have been, and embarrassment and reputational harm. So it was the Trump organization, him and his 2 sons, suing in his individual capacity. And so he sued in January. The Department of Treasury and the IRS hasn't even responded. And so he voluntarily dismissed it because they came up with this settlement in which he's going to dismiss the lawsuit, and they're going to create this $1.7 billion anti-weaponization fund for people who have been targeted by the government.
So is this really then a quote-unquote settlement?
This is so weird. This whole case is bizarre. I mean, it doesn't make any sense because, first of all, he's essentially suing himself, right? Because he's the head of, these are federal agencies, the IRS and the Department of Treasury, that he oversees.
Right.
And so he's suing them. And so what was bizarre was the Department of Justice was representing the defendants, the IRS and Treasury, and he had his personal attorneys representing him and his sons as plaintiffs. So that whole thing is bizarre. I think this is actually a settlement, but it's not a typical situation where 2 private parties come together and they agree to settle and move on. Because he has to create this fund, they're taking taxpayer funds and putting it in this fund. So it's an unusual situation.
Is the fund itself legal? We're talking about this $1.7 billion fund that the president is creating. Is that even legal?
I don't think so. I read the settlement agreement last night. It's only 2 pages. They didn't file it with the court, but I think this is going to need congressional approval. There's going to be significant litigation. It just doesn't seem proper. And here's why. Because the committee, the way they'll set up this fund is there'll be a 5-person committee. They're appointed by the president. They create their own processes and procedures in terms of who can apply for these funds. And these are people who have allegedly been targeted by the federal government. And in the settlement agreement, they actually say the Democrats and the Biden administration. So I'm like, is this only Republicans who can apply for this? And then they don't have to say what the criteria is. They don't have to disclose who the money's going to. They have to quarterly report that to the AG. But none of this has to be public. So anybody, and it can be organizations, it can be individuals, can apply. There's no transparency to it. So I think it's going to have a lot of litigation. And I just don't, as it's written in the settlement agreement, I can't see this being deemed lawful.
If you were to set up a fund, you'd have to have some money to set up the fund.
Yes.
You need money for a fund.
Correct.
Where would the money for this fund come from?
Well, that's going to be taxpayer money. And so, it'll be taxpayer money, $1.7 billion, and the disbursements will go out until I think it was January 1 of 2028. And then if there's any funds left at that point, it'll go back into the federal government's coffers.
I think you lost me at taxpayer money, Whitney.
Exactly. I don't want my money going there, but
right.
Okay.
Whitney, always love having you on the show.
Sure.
We are going to step aside.